What do you think of when you hear the name Somaliland? We're guessing it's horror headlines of civil war, images of Black Hawks crashing down, freaky high seas piracy, and a feeling that here is a country that you should never go to, not unless you want to start an exciting new life as a professional hostage. Yet, while this reaction is common, it's also wrong-headed. Somaliland, you see, is no longer part of the failed state that is Somalia. In 1991, at the height of the Civil War, it broke off from its brother nation, declaring independence. A government was established, borders, a currency, its own army. By the early 2000s, Somaliland was more or less a functional nation, a safe, semi-democratic twin to Somalia's dysfunctional carnage. The only problem? No other nation on earth recognizes its existence. Independent for 30 years, Somaliland still officially remains part of Somalia, ignored by the UN, the African Union, and the USA, even as it represents a path to stability for the troubled region. Today, Geographics is investigating a country that doesn't exist, and how this non-existence impacts its millions of citizens. On the Horn of Africa, along one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, lies an invisible nation. Bordered by Djibouti in the northwest, Ethiopia to the west and south, and Somalia to the east, Somaliland is more than a mere geographical curiosity. At 176,120 square kilometers, it's larger than Florida. Its estimated population of 4.5 million is comparable to that of Oregon. Like those states, it has its own flag, an anthem, its own police force. Unlike them, it also issues its own currency and passports and maintains a standing army. The government in the capital of Hargeisa controls the nation's borders. It has consulates in Washington, D.C., and it plays host to official missions from the UK, UAE, Turkey, and more. But while only the weirdest of weirdos would try to claim that Florida doesn't exist, the opposite is true of Somaliland. Gatecrash the UN and demand to see the Somaliland representative, and you'll instead get pointed to the guy from Somalia. Ask a White House press corps meeting for the president's position on the nation, and you'll probably be told that he doesn't have one. That's because Somaliland is a ghost state, a place that doesn't legally exist. As far as the entire world is concerned, it's part of the gigantic basket case that is Somalia. On the ground, though, the two couldn't look more different. For one, Somaliland is relatively stable. There have been no significant terrorist attacks since 2008. Its waters are mostly untroubled by piracy, and the capital's crime rate is on par with most American cities. And that stability also carries across to the nation's politics. While Somalia last held a proper election back when Elvis was both still alive and under 200 pounds, Somaliland regularly hosts democratic votes. As recently as 2021, a fair election for parliament saw the incumbent government peacefully step aside after losing power, something that apparently not even America is capable of these days. Another major difference with Somalia is the people who make up its population. While Somalis and Somalilanders are ethnically similar, their clan background is very different. In Somaliland, the dominant clan is the culturally distinct Isaaq. Although there are other clans, it's the Isaaq who make up most of the population. Yet, for all its success in not being Somalia, Somaliland is still a troubled place. Most of its GDP of $2 billion comes from remittances sent back by citizens living and working abroad. In terms of riches, it's the fourth poorest nation on the planet. Yet it's not poverty that really holds Somaliland back, that keeps aid and international business away. Nope. It's lack of recognition. States only become official when other nations recognize them. Like a teenage geek at a party, Somaliland has been consistently ignored by everyone from pretty France to dweeby Canada. But while being ghosted by your high school peers can feel like a catastrophe, on the global stage, the consequences really are catastrophic. Every time Somaliland asks for aid, that aid gets sent not to Hargeisa, but to Mogadishu, where Somali politicians are all like, send this to Somaliland? Hard pass. The government can't apply for loans to improve infrastructure. Thanks to state warnings, foreign investment is almost non-existent. The reality for its citizens, then, is that they're effectively ghosts, unable to travel on their passports, ignored by the wider world, unable to access basic global services. And all of this raises a question. How did it happen? How did Somaliland come to be so different to Somalia? And why does no one important seem to care? To answer that question, we're going to have to dive deep into the region's history, a history built on colonialism, exploitation, and unimaginable violence. In the end, it was the goats that did it. Well, more accurately, it was the goats and great power competition, but for now, we're just going to go ahead and blame the goats. In 1839, the British Empire had a problem: how to feed the garrison at its new coaling station in the port of Aden in modern-day Yemen. The solution? Establish an agreement with tribes across the Gulf to supply a regular stream of goats, tribes living in what is now known as Somaliland. Although it was mutton that kick-started Britain's interest in Somaliland, that interest quickly grew into something a little more colonial. Pretty soon, France and Italy were establishing their own coaling stations on the coast, triggering feelings of European rivalry. But since Egypt had by now asserted a claim to the Somaliland coast, there was little the British could do but grumble about it over a cup of tea. Until, that is, a series of internal crises put Egypt on its own path to colonial domination, and suddenly London was able to make its move. In 1888, scores of new treaties were signed with the coastal tribes, officially creating the Protectorate of British Somaliland. From London's perspective, it was just in time. Just 4 years before, France had founded its own country of French Somaliland, today Djibouti. A year after the British treaty, Italy would in turn fuse two protectorates into Italian Somaliland, the basis for modern-day Somalia. It's here that we can see Somaliland really begin to diverge from Somalia, and not just in the language of their new overlords. For all they had been quick to snatch up Somaliland, the British were less like, woo, new colony, and more like, oh man, that's a lot of dust. It's a lot of goats. London considered Somaliland such a backwater that aside from the vital ports, pretty much the whole thing was left to run itself according to the old clan structures that were in place for centuries. When a religious rebellion broke out in 1899 under the dervish leader Maximud Kabdule Xaxon, the Brits found themselves protecting even less of the protectorate. Right up until Xaxon's military defeat in 1920 and subsequent death from Spanish flu, the colonial administration was pretty much confined to the coast. The Italian colonial project, by contrast, was far more hands-on. Spared the headache of rebellion, the Italians were able to impose a top-down structure on Somalia. Old clan politics were erased or sidelined, a process that only gathered steam after the first fascist governor was appointed in 1923. By 1936, Somalia was no longer even an independent colony, but rather a mere province of Italian East Africa, alongside Eritrea and freshly annexed Ethiopia. As we come to 1940 then, Somaliland and Somalia had been under separate administrations for over 50 years. To just illustrate how long that is, 50 years ago from our time, Nixon was heading for a landslide re-election, the Vietnam War was raging, and nobody had any idea what a Star Wars was. But the two colonies would soon be joined by one of the most disruptive events of all time, World War II. Italy's declaration of war on Britain in 1940 caught the empire on the back foot. By August, Somaliland had been annexed into Italian East Africa. But it wouldn't stay there for very long. The East African Campaign of 1941 saw the Allies' first major victory. Italy's empire crumbled. In the aftermath, both Somaliland and Somalia were united under British rule. But this wouldn't be the end of the two nations' separate stories. In many ways, this wartime forced union would just be the bloody beginning. Now, just before we continue with today's video, a quick word from our sponsor, Squarespace. So, look, it's still early in the year, still time to make 2022 the year that you take that next step on that big web project that you've been thinking about. Fortunately, Squarespace gives you every possible tool you might want to make your dream a reality. Whether it's a small business, a sports blog, a creative portfolio, or just a page full of the dankest of memes, it doesn't matter. If you can dream it, you can build it on Squarespace. Are you looking to get in and out quick without thinking too much about what your website should look like? Well, use one of their quick, beautiful templates to make a website that's fresh and for you. Or maybe you're more of a hands-on person. You've got lots of opinions and ideas about what exactly your site should look like. Well, Squarespace gives you all the customization options you could ever want with no updates, no patches, no technical BS to worry about. Once you're done setting up your website, tinkering with the design if you are so inclined, or maybe just playing around with the colors, there are many extra features that Squarespace provides so that your website can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 customer support. It's everything you could ever want in one place. So when you're ready to get started on the next web project of yours, big or small, if it involves a website, Do it with Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your new site, go to squarespace.com/geographics, and you'll save 10% of your first purchase of a website or a domain.